So our next speaker is Dr. Abby Rader. She's going to be speaking to us about the ORCA, the Observer Reported Communication Ability Measure, and really trying to explain to us what is a minimal meaningful change. And it's very important to try to understand that, because we take these measures and we spend a lot of time in these assessments, and the community rallied, and 300 people filling out the original survey, another 200 people filling out another survey over the last 5-6 years, and then again just recently, in 2 weeks' time, we had another 150 families, more than that, filling out an additional survey in order for her to collect this data, with the ultimate goal being for us to understand, what does a point change mean for our children? What does that mean? 2 points, 3 points, 5 points? It means nothing to us. But if we can understand, if our kid were to gain 2 points, that's a finger point, that's an eye gaze, that's responding to their name, that's responding to the word yes or no, that's saying the word yes or no with a head shake or a head nod. All of those things are so important. What do these scores actually mean? So Abby's going to walk you through some of the statistical methods and the reasons why they did what they did, and they asked you to do those incredible surveys. That was a lot of work, but we're very grateful to everybody that participated. So Abby, please come and share with everybody the results.
Okay. Yeah, so like Allison said, I'm going to present on the ORCA measure. And specifically, we've talked about the Bailey and Vineland, and you get these nice numbers from them, but what do those actually mean? So both in terms of what's a meaningful change, but then also in terms of what is a score of 50? What is a score of, 35? Brief disclosures. Okay, tiny bit of background. So in order to effectively measure any new treatment, whatever it's for, it has to be fit for purpose. What does that mean? Essentially, it's measuring what we intend for it to measure, and it works in the population that we are using it in. So in this case, that would be Angelman. And what we find is that a lot of the measures that were developed for a verbal population. So specifically for communication, which is one of the most important domains. My team at Duke developed the Observer Reported Communication Ability Measure directly with input from caregivers and FAST organization leadership, everyone, to make sure it was like the best measure we could make, reflecting what's actually important to caregivers. It measures 3 domains of communication: expressive, receptive, and pragmatic. So expressive is like, conveying your needs, thoughts, emotions in Angelman normally through things like eye gaze or pointing towards something, things like that. Receptive communication, which is showing that you understand something that was said to you. And then pragmatic or social communication. Just to state this again, so funding all came from FAST, so this has all come from you all, so thank you. So while the ORCA itself was developed using these super rigorous, well accepted in the field methods, when we actually run this algorithm to get these scores from it, they don't mean anything on their own. And so what we have to do is basically develop these things called vignettes, or in this case, that's what we did, to show what these distinct score regions and ranges actually mean. So for example, you might have a 3-year-old with Angelman who has a score 55. How does that actually compare to others, for one thing? And then also, if they change scores later on, is that meaningful to the individual and their family? So that's my objective here, and like I said before, I'm going to be showing some vignettes. And I'm not going to go too in-depth into the fancy statistics behind everything, just because it gets pretty complicated. But the basis of it is that with the ORCA, with this really complex algorithm, we can get kind of the most likely communication behaviors at every single individual score. And using those, we can make these pretty vignettes that will not come out this pretty. This takes quite a bit of work to get the pictures on it. But we can do this for any score. So here I'm going to show 35, 50, and 65. But these can be used for any score change on the ORCA, and these same methods can be used for other measures as well. So like I said before, this is presenting a hypothetical child, Alex. And some of the things Alex is able to do, Alex is on kind of the higher end of the low end of the scale, so 35. Alex sometimes communicates that he wants an object by reaching or pointing, making a sound, looking at the object and then his parent, or bringing the object to his parent. For getting attention, Alex almost always grabs, taps, pulls on someone, or makes a sound, and that one we will follow across kind of the score range. And then there's some other skills. In the bottom left, you'll see some skills that Alex isn't able to do. With the ORCA and then also with these vignettes, we wanted to focus on what these kids could do as opposed to what they couldn't do. But just note, because this is slightly on the lower end, part of what is on the ORCA is things that kids on the higher end of the scale would be able to do. So a score of 50, this is right in the middle. And what we see here with this child, Jamie, is Jamie is able to use AAC devices. So that's kind of a big characteristic of this score. Looking at the get attention category in the far left side over here, Jamie is sometimes able to use a symbol on her device to get attention from her parent. Now, to be reflective of the wording on the ORCA, we also include word approximations here. Realistically, at a score of 50, you're probably not seeing word approximations, but again, trying to be consistent. So then Riley is on the higher end of the scale, and we see even more advancements, and I think the big landmark with Riley is that she is able to use 1 to 3 word or word approximations. And then again, tracking kind of that get attention category in the far left, she almost always uses a symbol on her device or a word approximation to get attention. So going from sometimes doing that to always doing that. These will be all put up on the poster that I have outside, so if you wanted to read more thoroughly into the different skills, you're welcome to. So this is great. We have these vignettes. What can they do for us? And I think that that's the important question, is if we're gonna use the ORCA in clinical trials, it's great, it's developed, really with so much input by caregivers. We want it to be the best measure possible. We wanna make sure that any changes we're tracking with the ORCA are meaningful. And so that's essentially what we did. We used those vignettes and we presented them right next to each other. So we did 2 points, 4 points, 6 points, and 8 points. And we presented them straight to caregivers and said, is this a meaningful improvement? If this is a hypothetical child with Angelman syndrome, and it started at a score of 55 and then went up to a score of 57, of course not showing them that that's the change, would that be meaningful to you? And what we found is that at a score change of 2 points, over half of participants in the study said that that would be meaningful to them. So what does that actually look like? And I think what's really interesting here is that a 2-point change might seem relatively small, especially in the context of the score range of the ORCA, which goes from about 20 to 80. But when we look at the actual changes that would happen that would correspond to a 2-point change, they could be quite dramatic to daily life. So some examples of this would be, you might see someone go from responding when told no or stop to also sometimes following one-step directions. You might see someone start sometimes answering yes or no questions, so go from never answering yes or no questions to sometimes doing that. And then for those who are already sometimes answering yes or no questions, you might see them also sometimes answering open-ended question, which is a huge improvement in skill. With a 3-point change, of course, it includes all of those 2-point changes as well. But what you'll also find is some kids that maybe already start pretty high functioning will start using symbols. And then a 4-point change, it gets even bigger, where you see, again, kids who are relatively high functioning start to use 1 to 3 word or word approximations. This is not to say that this is very, very common at this level. This is really only happening in a few kids, where you start to see it become much more consistent is around an 8-point change. And there's actually a plot you can see where it just levels out at 8. But I think the major takeaway here is that when we actually talk to caregivers about what's meaningful in their lives, a relatively small score change of 2, potentially even smaller, is actually very meaningful. And this is, I think, what a lot of people predicted, what a lot of you probably already knew. But it's great to have, in an actual study that we will publish and hopefully tell the FDA that, this is something that's meaningful to this population. Future directions, we're hoping to continue the study about meaningful score differences. So this is very preliminary data. We will continue onward with everything. Also, we're working on creating kind of regions, so low, intermediate, and high ability, communication ability, and then also the ORCA itself is being translated into other neurodevelopmental conditions. So hopefully we can use these same methods to develop vignettes for them too. Big thank you to everyone on my team, especially Bryce Reed, who's sitting right here, and Nicole Lucas, and then also, of course, Allison and Jennifer for all they've done. And thank you to all of you all. This is all supported by caregivers, so thank you.
That's incredible work, and it's been years of effort, and thank you for putting that all together for our community, because this has been a huge effort by our community. What I want everyone to acknowledge is when we look at these endpoints in clinical trials, when we're trying to understand and assess expressive or receptive language, which we all want desperately, things like the Bailey don't capture anything but words, word approximations, or babble. They don't capture the AAC use that might change well before or instead of words. It doesn't really capture signs and symbols, gestures and eye gaze, all of those things in which are really meaningful as our kids gain skills and communication abilities. And so for us to be able to see a measure that deeply captures that real distinguished change at a granular level, to truly be able to place my child in a category so I can see change in all of these areas that I dream about for her, is huge. And that is all because of the work of you guys. This was one of the only measures for Angelman syndrome to date that is being used in clinical trials that we started from scratch, from nothing. And that was because of the input and the collaboration and the real commitment by caregivers. So thank you to Bryce and Nicole and Abby for their commitment to this project. And thank you to the FDA for recommending we do this project. But most importantly, thank you to the caregivers, because we couldn't have done it without all of you.